Welcome to the Legacy Driven Marriages Podcast, episode 40. I'm Walt McKinley, and I am here with my beautiful wife and my partner in crime, as always, Stephanie.
Hey, everybody.
We love that you're here. So, look, guys, before we even get started today, make sure you go hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss an episode. And make sure that you share this with somebody you know needs or would enjoy this conversation. I just want to just take a second just to say thank you to each and every one of you who maybe this is your first time or maybe you've been showing up for 40 episodes. Either way, we just appreciate you being here.
Yes, I agree.
Got them. So look, today we're going to talk about one of life's most vital skills. I mean, it is the skill that will make and break literally every single aspect of your life. And for Stephanie and I don't know that we ever, 20 years ago, we would have thought this, but now 24 years married and 26 years of being together, we understand that communication and the importance of communication cannot be understated on its impact in every relationship you have. But good Lord, 8 pounds, 6 ounce baby Jesus for you guys that watch Talladega Nights, you understand if you've been together for any period of time, communication or the lack of a lot of times really is the thing that makes or breaks your relationship. Because let's be real, without communication, you don't have intimacy, you don't have trust. Like the other parts of a relationship that you need in order for it to flourish and thrive won't even be there if you can't do this basic skill that seems really easy. But in all actuality, when you're living together with somebody 24/7, it is not easy.
I got to tell you guys, communication to me is, I agree with most people. If you ask them the key to a successful marriage, I will still say communication is number one for sure for me. And also, I feel like a broken record because I say this all the time, that I used to hate when people would say that because I was like, okay, you say communication, but a lot of times we feel like we're communicating, but it's not effective communication. And that's really the difference. Is we want to teach you guys how to have effective communication where you're both feeling seen and heard, because typically that's where there's a communication breakdown. If you're feeling unseen and unheard by your spouse, then you're not communicating well. And that's what we're trying to work on, is not just communicating, because you can definitely communicate and it's not going to go very far because they're just going to tune you out, or, they're not going to hear you because you're saying things in a way that is not coming across to them to where they're going to hear it. Because, sometimes it's blaming, sometimes it's defensive, sometimes, it's all kinds of ways that you can communicate that are not healthy and not helpful and not effective. So,
well, think about this. We've done this all to each other. Everything we're going to talk about today, by the way, you guys, we've literally done to each other. So we're going to give you guys 4 types of destructive communication styles. And then we're going to give you guys one real tactical advantage that you can start utilizing in your relationship today with your partner that's going to transform the way that you guys communicate with each other. Because I like what you said, Steph. You said it's not just communicating. Is the communication you're giving being received by your partner? And if it is, what kind of reception is it getting? Because typically when you're in an argument or things ain't going good, that reception they're getting, it's either one ear and out the other, or it's like Teflon Don, it's just bouncing off them, or they're taking it in. And every time they take another word out of your mouth, then their face gets more red and the smoke comes out of their ears. And so how do you have a fruitful conversation with your spouse where both people feel seen and feel heard? Nobody wins, just the relationship does. And you guys figure out a way to compromise. And by the way, Steph and I we're really intentional about this. We're talking about this. We're teaching you guys this. We still struggle with this sometimes, because when you're communicating with somebody you live with 24 hours a day, there's emotion and you don't get a break from them in the same way. And there's past resentments and disappointments and hurts that all play in to that communication you're having with this person. And that's not even counting the baggage that we all bring into relationships from past experiences before they ever came into your life. and hurts and pain and struggles and shame that we carry from traumas that have happened in our life, we carry into our current relationship, and we communicate in the same manner that maybe we always have. And so this is just really about bringing that awareness to you.
Yeah, and this isn't only helpful in your marriage relationship. This is a key life skill. Like this will help you in all relationships
Right.
because if you can understand a better way to communicate, it will help you in every aspect of your life. So obviously we're focusing in on the marriage, but because that is the most, to us anyways, that's the most important relationship in your life. So we are going to really focus on that, but honestly you guys, this applies everywhere in your life. Being a better communicator in general is just key.
And so we're going to start off with the 4 types of destructive communication styles. And it's really important during this next little segment that we have on here, you ask yourself, what tendency do I really have? And maybe rank them 1 through 4, because
Or which one of these destructive patterns do you tend to, is kind of like your default? What do you go to
mhm,
when you get into a conflict with your spouse? Like, because to be honest, Walt and I really just learned about this particular thing. And that's why we were like, we have to share this with our listeners because we're currently in a marriage workshop with our church and we're learning about this. And we both were like, wow, because there's two on here that I definitely recognize right away. Like, that's me, that's him. And we're opposite. And so I thought that was me. And then I read through all of them and I was like, oh, I didn't even realize there's two more. And wow, this just opened up a whole new thing for me. Like, I think you guys too are probably going to have a light bulb moment of like, oh, wow, I didn't even realize I was doing that or that that's a part of how I how I fight. That's my fight style kind of thing.
mhm.
And it was really eye opening. And then, like he said, we're going to share that solution of how to do this better. And this was also eye opening to us because I think there are parts of it we learned how to do through trial and error,
Yeah,
but
a lot of air.
but we're still even learning like, wow, this is actually really helpful. Like I think this will help all couples so much. So really you guys take notes on this one today and take mental notes of and think about for yourself and your spouse like how do you see where you fit into this because and like he's mentioned this earlier that really we all do all four but you do have one or two that are generally more key for you.
Yeah, it's like you can use your left hand and your right hand, but you have a dominant hand for sure.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with these. And by the way, what's really crazy is when you've been together for so long, or maybe just you as an individual, the way that I communicate has vastly changed, but I'm still
Mhm.
predispositioned to 2 of these, especially just because I have a much more aggressive, assertive personality. And Stephanie has more of a introverted, passive personality. We both kind of, as we've grown each other, we're meeting more in the middle on some of these things, but we both have a tendency to do these. So, I mean, I guess this is a good point. Let's just
Yeah.
jump right up in these
So
bad boys.
I'm gonna start with the first type of destructive communication style, and that is withdraw and avoid. And this was my go-to. I am a non-confrontational type of person. I don't like conflict. I try to avoid it whenever I can. Um, and I felt like I'm married to someone who was confrontational and likes to address things up front right away. And I was not used to that. Honestly, growing up, my parents are well, mostly my mom. She's more of a withdraw and avoid too. So I think I just learned to be. I picked up what she was doing. I am similar to how she was, and to be honest, my dad was more confrontational. So it's just weird that that has played out to where it's kind of the same in my marriage, which I'm sure a lot of people are going to recognize in this, is that we
Let's keep
tend
it
to
real.
be what we grew up around. And, you know, I don't know, like I know my mom was the same. It was kind of like a lot of times she just didn't want to have the argument and she'd rather not deal with it. And So you sweep it under the rug, or you just walk away, or you kind of just keep it to yourself, or all of those things are tendencies of someone who withdraws and avoids. And this is really funny because Walt and I had an argument recently.
Yes, you guys, we still get on each other's nerves and get them little petty arguments too.
And I I was kind of laughing to myself afterward because we actually had to talk. We talked about this in our group, and realized that Walt was actually doing the withdraw and avoid in this argument. And I became him, and I was the one that was confronting the issue and confronting him about it, and he was avoiding it. And so it's really funny how once you recognize this, you're going to start seeing it and recognizing it for yourself and in your own arguments and fights. And it's just funny because I was telling them I'm really, after all these years, like, you do change and grow,
Hmm.
and you and your partner rub off on each other too. So
Well, you hope so. I mean, the good, the bad, the ugly, you do really rub off on each other. And think about somebody that you just your buddy, right, guys? Think about your buddy, and your buddy says something all the time. They got a thing that they say, and you're gonna pick up on that vernacular that he's saying,
Mhm.
that little saying that they do, and
Well, that's what they say, like, the people you keep they always say, like, the top 5 people you keep around you.
mhm.
That's why you have to be conscious of who you keep around you, because you're going to pick up the things that they do and they say.
And so Steph and I really have rubbed off on each other over the years on just every dynamic of our life. But it's funny because I say the older Steph gets, the more savage she gets. And the older I get, the more I'm like, it ain't even that serious. But
Yes,
man,
we
it would have
have
been
really
serious at
traded
20.
places.
Promise you at 20 and 25, I'd have been like, oh, we're going to talk about this right now.
Uh-huh.
And what's crazy is I think about that withdraw and avoid style for somebody who's more confrontational. It's like the death nail. Somebody walks away from you. One, you're super pissed, right? Because they walked away from you. And two, you're kind of thrown off guard and you're like, well, where are you going? And typically people with a confrontational style, they're some of the, Steph always says, they're like the most sensitive ones, the ones that can't really take the same feedback that they're dishing out in the moment. And so I think it's between you and your spouse, it's important to be self-aware of your own, but then also be self-aware of your spouse's, because there's a way as your spouse, like if your spouse needs a second to decompress and your spouse needs a second to come back and have that conversation, and their tendencies to withdraw and avoid, you don't want to let them withdraw so long that you don't talk about it and that you're faking happiness and you're all happy on Instagram and Facebook. Look at, we love each other. And then behind the doors, you guys are like screaming at each other and one person's walking away and you don't talk for 6 days. And we all know people who it happens to.
Right, and that's the bad thing about this one is you don't deal with the issue, and you end up holding it inside and building resentment. And so that's how it comes out later, and you don't want to do that because that can lead to bigger arguments down the road.
So give them space to decompress and then come back when both people are more calm and have that conversation. But if you have a withdraw and avoid personality or your spouse does, make sure you have the conversation because resentment's real. We talk about it on, gosh, I feel like multiple episodes now. That drip turns into a fire hose. But if you force the action and you force the conversation, they're going to feel like they weren't even heard at all because you didn't even give them a second. And then the relationship's going to
They might
atrophy
feel
and hurt since
attacked.
then too.
Yeah.
And so that the first one was withdraw and avoid. Now the second one is escalate. Now that was still me in a lot of ways, but definitely me in my 20s and 30s. Where now I never, in here you've got where you might yell or you might name call or there's threats. Like if you know what, you want to talk to me like that, I'll just freaking leave and I won't come back. There's physical violence that happens, and if you're in that situation, you need to leave and go find a safe space. So escalation comes in many different varieties. For me, it was sarcasm. Just, you're just making a comment to get a reaction and being an asshole in the moment, really because your feelings are hurt or you're defensive or you want to be right or whatever the emotion is for you in the moment. But you end up just kind of making those snarky little sarcastic comments. And it's just not healthy. And so you got to really understand what level of escalation do you take that to? Because I grew up in homes with a lot of domestic violence in them. I was very adamant about I don't raise my voice. I don't cuss at Steph. I don't lose my temper in that way. I've never cornered her or made her feel physically unsafe. But man, I could be a petty asshole. And you know what? If I'm not careful, I could really still be one now, not just to her, but to other people too. So as I've gotten in more control of that escalatory part of my personality, it has a direct correlation to how much happiness and how much joy I personally have, but it also has a direct correlation to our relationship too. And so I think if you feel yourself in that moment, right? So what can you do if you feel yourself in that moment? Call a timeout, man. Call a timeout on yourself. When you feel like your anger is starting to get to the point where you're really losing your temper.
I just want to mention something you didn't mention. So they say to escalate means increase intensity, and also it's an attempt to control or back the other person down. It can be yelling louder or talking over your spouse. And he mentioned the sarcasm, name calling, subtle threats, recalling past failures, or in extreme cases, a physical attack. So that's just what they mean by escalate.
Right. And I think with all of these, there's a control tactic that you have if you do it.
Mhm.
You're trying to, it's your way or the highway. You're trying to incite a response. You're
You
trying
are
to,
trying to back the other person down.
but in this one for sure, especially those people who will back somebody physically
Mhm.
into a corner, or you're calling somebody out of their name and you're
But
cussing
let's
at
be
them.
real, all of us, we've all had arguments where it's gotten escalated by both parties.
Mm-hmm.
You're both escalating, and then it just becomes a yelling match and you don't get anywhere. That's what
Mm-hmm.
happens in escalation. Or it's one person yelling over the other person and that person's definitely not being seen or heard. So
Yeah.
either way,
So
it's
when you build a self-awareness to
destructive.
which one you have, especially this one, you or your spouse, I don't care who does it, somebody call a timeout, because you're going to have this conversation with your spouse, or hopefully they're going to listen to this episode with you. You guys will both be able to recognize some of these patterns and then call that timeout, take a break until everybody's calm and that escalation is now back down to the norm, and then have a conversation that really moves you forward when you can be rational and non-emotional about whatever the topic is that you're having a disagreement on.
Yeah, I just want to point out, like, that's how you'll know you're escalating. Is if you know you're having to raise your voice, or you're talking over the other person, or um, that type of thing, or you're getting sarcastic, and those are the things that you know you're escalating. If you're starting to do those things, or you recognize that your partner is, you're in escalation, and that's where someone has to say, hey, let's take a time out. Let's revisit this when we're calm and our emotions are more in check. That's
Mm-hmm.
typically what has to happen in those moments. Someone's going to walk away, or it's going to escalate to the point where someone's getting hurt. So,
And by the way, it takes a lot of maturity on both people to be able to time out and walk away. It takes a lot of maturity for the person who says time out in the moment. And it takes a lot of maturity also for the person who's still really pissed that says, all right, we're just going to time out for a second, but I don't want to time out, but we're going to do it. And give yourself an opportunity to compose yourself so that you can reach a compromise on this. Because again, nobody wins if somebody wins.
right. So the third one is you negatively interpret. And I have to tell you guys, this is another one. This is the one that hit me like, wow, I didn't think of that as a way to, like a communication style, but this is where you take either questions that they say to you, or their body language, or their tone, and sometimes you misinterpret how they were saying it because you already, either it's happened a lot in the past, maybe not even with them, maybe it was someone else in your life that did something that triggers you. maybe they said something that it triggers you from something in your past, maybe the way your parent talked to you, maybe a past relationship. And or it's something that they used to do. So you just have this past history where you can't help but think that way, even if they have changed. And sometimes, so you will interpret it in a negative way, a negative connotation based on your own experiences. Or maybe it's just sometimes it's like a self-esteem thing with you, or like, you're going to take something more personal because of how you feel about yourself. And so this is one that hit me like, oh, sometimes maybe I am interpreting something. Maybe he didn't even mean it that way, but I took it that way because I was feeling sensitive about whatever it was. Like, maybe he was like, for me, I run late a lot. I have issues with time management, and like, so he gets upset about that a lot.
And I'm a 20-year military guy, so you can imagine how my time management is.
So he's like, generally will be rushing me, or I feel like he's rushing me because I don't like to be rushed. I like to take my time. But then a lot of times I wait too long to allow enough time to have gotten ready. So then I didn't really plan enough time. So then he's rushing me, but I'm getting mad at him for rushing me, but really it's my own fault because I didn't leave enough time to get ready. So there's things in there that it was like, oh, like sometimes you got to take a step back and go, maybe I am misreading the situation. Maybe that wasn't really him. Maybe that has something to do with something with me. Or, you know, he says something to me and it's like, oh, my dad always talked to me like that. And that just, and then you got triggered more because it just brought you back to a place you remember being talked to like that, or you felt like you were, even if they weren't, and you react badly in that moment. And that's the kind of, so this is another type of destructive communication style.
Well, and I think even tone matters, body language matters. Let's say my back's hurting, so I kind of got my arms crossed in front of me. And Steph's like, "What do you want for dinner?" I'm like, "I don't care." And so all of a sudden now she's negatively interpreting my body language and my tone. I just really don't care. And maybe my tone is a little off because my back hurts and I got my arms crossed. So I look closed off to her. I just look like I'm upset, but I'm really genuinely not. And I think in those moments,
Or it came across that way because your back was hurting. So you're saying it in a way that it sounds like you're mad, but you're mad over your back, not
yeah,
that
yeah, you're just,
what I'm
like you're
asking
just
you.
edgy because you're in pain. And so in those moments, we really got to ask clarifying questions to our spouse in the moment. Let's say Steph and I were going for a Jeep ride and she wore flip flops. And typically we get out of the Jeep if we go on some trails and I say, "Oh man, you're going to wear that?" And she thinks I mean her whole outfit. And she's like, gets all, let's say there's some insecurity. She gets all upset, like, "Oh, you don't like how these shorts look on me." And you don't like, and then it like
Yeah, I'm
cascades into
taking
this
it like
whole
I looked
thing.
bad, or he trying to insinuate I looked bad in it, or that wasn't appropriate wear, or whatever. Like,
When really I'm like, "No, you should probably put some sneakers on because there's cactus out there and a bunch of dirt." And yeah, I just meant the sneakers, not the whole outfit. But how many times have we made, you guys have all heard that saying, you make a mountain out of a molehill.
right. And there's a lot of us, there's issues like for women, we're very sensitive about comments on how we look because we're
Mm-hmm.
so judged on that. And there's a lot of us who have insecurity in that. And so when someone makes a comment on that, then we tend to negatively take that in, whether they meant it that way or not.
Well, but your spouse doesn't think that. Your spouse loves you and they married you because they think you're hot, right? So,
Yeah, but it's
but
like
that's,
one of those, like
yeah.
the age old where women are like, how
Uh-huh.
do I look? And the man's like, don't ask me that question. Like
You want the,
you're setting me up for
you want the
failure.
married answer or you want my real answer? Which one we looking to get here? And I think that's just it with this one specifically is if you're negatively interpreting, go back and ask what your spouse really meant. Sometimes we put ourselves in such a negative headspace. And with our spouse, something one of our kids said, something our boss said, hell, something that the person behind you in the grocery store said that had nothing to do with you. We put ourselves in such a negative space and it ruins our whole day. And then it also affects the way we interact with everybody else. So it really does have this negative cascading effect on you. And so if you feel like you're negatively interpreting things, you've got to dig deeper and start asking yourself, why am I negatively interpreting these things? Did they mean it to be negative? Or is there some healing work that I need to do from some experiences that I'm continuing to keep in my life? And it continues to anchor me and continues to drown me every day, where you don't have that internal freedom that each and every one of us deserve to have because we haven't actually done some healing work. You got to get really deep with yourself on that one.
Yeah, so we know we have a friend that or a couple that we're friends with, and I noticed that they do this really well actually, where they must have realized that they had an issue with this, with negatively interpreting each other. So I now hear them, I've heard him definitely a
Mm-hmm.
lot
Mm-hmm.
say, you know, if she said something to him, he'll say it back to her and say, "So you what you meant was this." And he'll say how he took it. And then if he's wrong, she'll say, "No, that's not what I meant." And she'll explain it to him. And then they, by doing that, have, kept themselves from having a lot of arguments, a lot of big arguments, because they're making sure that they're understanding what the spouse was actually saying. Because a lot of times we do misinterpret each other.
Well, it's like your spouse could be like, "Hey, did you take out the trash?" And husbands were like, always on me about the damn trash.
Yeah,
You
they're
know I didn't
nagging.
take it out. You know, and you start getting all mad, but really they didn't just walk past the trash can to see that you didn't take it out.
Really, they're just asking because they wanted to know, like, if they need to take it out or whatever. It could be something just
Mm-hmm,
simple,
mm-hmm.
like,
Then
"Hey,
it's
did you
like,
take it
hey,
out?"
are you asking me if I took the trash out because you don't know? Or are you telling me, please take the trash out?
Yeah, and so it's really good for each of you to clarify. This is something this was fairly new to me, and this is going to come up in the solution stuff we were going to talk about after this. But I was really like, that is actually really helpful. I never think to do that. I need to and it's something that you got to think about and start doing to make it a habit, because I'm not in the habit of doing it. So I just don't even,
Mhm.
but this would save us from so many arguments if we just
Facts.
reiterate and clarify in the moment. Like if we weren't sure how, or we know we're taking that in a certain kind of way, and that's going to lead to an argument, to maybe just stop and say, "Hey, is this what you meant? Because this is how I took it."
And by the way, if they meant it that way and you say, hey, is this what you meant? Because this is how I took it. They might say, you know what? I was wrong. I'm kind of being an asshole right now. Sorry about that. I did mean it that way, but sorry. You know, you can give them a realization in this. And so,
Mhm.
so we talked about three. We're going to go to the last one now. Then we're going to give you a tried and proven method for what to do from this point moving forward. So we did withdraw and avoid, escalate, negatively interpret, and the last one is invalidate. And this gaslighting falls into this too. This is where you put somebody's thoughts or their feelings or you're like, it could always be worse. Well, you know what? So and so's wife doesn't act like that. And you really just put their character down, their feelings, their thoughts, their emotions, then you make them feel less than, and you're really dismissive when they come to you and they say, hey, I've talked to you about this like 4 times already, and I feel like I'm just talking and you're not listening. You know what? That's so ridiculous. You're trying to make everything a bigger deal than it actually is. For them in the moment, it is a big deal. Again, this is about going back to the team and the marriage winning, not you individually. And so I
And
think
this
it's
one to me, this is a lot about respect. When you invalidate your partner and you put down their feelings or whatever whatever they say, that's a lack of respect. Like you're really disrespecting them. So this can be very hurtful.
so it's important to say in the moment, maybe you do really think it's ridiculous. Look, you can't be married and you don't think your spouse is overreacting sometimes or it's ridiculous. But for them in the moment, they're not overreacting and it's not ridiculous. So it's
Mhm.
important to ask your spouse, if you really want to make them feel valued, you guys, and you really want to make them feel seen and heard, and you really want to strengthen your marriage and skip these arguments that are going to happen if you invalidate and just say, hey, help me understand why are you taking it that way? What's your perspective on this? Why does that hurt your feelings when I do that? I just don't understand.
This is another one that, so the negatively interpret and invalidate, this one, to me, they kind of cross lines a little bit. And this was an eye opener because this was the two that I was like, oh, wow, I do this sometimes. And well, one thing I realized was I think this is actually one of the biggest ones I do more recently that I didn't even know I was doing. Like, so what he's saying is I felt like sometimes he was negatively interpreting something I said and felt like I was invalidating him. So that's what I mean by I feel like this kind of crosses because I had to stop him recently because I felt like it was something that comes up a lot and I could never get to the bottom of. I could never understand why he reacted the way he reacted and he never explained it. So I had to stop him one day and say, "Hey, like why do you get so upset when I say this particular thing?" And it has to do with like I can't remember how, it's some way that I said something, but he took it as I was like calling him a liar.
No, okay, so I'll give more context. So let's say Stephanie and I are talking about something that was said previously, right? And we're both a little bit ramped up about it. And I'd say, well, this is what I said. And she goes, no, that's not what you said. You said this. And I'm on the other side thinking, no, I know what I damn said.
But I felt like I knew what I said.
So
And I knew what
I
he
know
said.
what I said. She might have interpreted or heard what I said differently. And sometimes one word in the sentence does make a difference with how that comes
Or vice
across.
versa.
And so when she would come at me and say, no,
I
this is
felt
what
like
you
he
said.
was, this is one of those moments. And this is why I was like, ooh, on the negatively interpret, you got to start asking them, hey, is this what you mean when you said that? Or,
Yeah.
like you really got to clarify with your spouse because,
Yeah, help me understand.
yeah, because I have to say, like a couple different times, like I said something kind of flippantly, not even thinking it was anything. And he got really upset. And I thought, why is he reacting that way? Because I didn't think it was anything very serious. And
Tripping, this ain't even a big deal.
and he would get really upset and like took it really personal. And I was always confused by it. So I literally had to ask him the one day, like, hey, when I say this, like, I'm trying to say like what I meant by it. And then he was like, no, this is how I took it. So we actually had a pretty good discussion about it. And I was like, well, now I understand. And now I know where that's coming from. And because he ended up saying that there was something his dad would always say to him, and like, so I think what I was saying was triggering something from that. Like, it's hard to explain, but
Well, I think it's in those moments, it's some of those things that you still got to heal from. But I also think it's you feel invalidated in the moment, or you feel you're being told how you're supposed to feel, or what you did say, and they're not lining up.
but that's what I mean. I think like you were used to the way your dad said things like that to you, and somehow whatever I was saying was kind of coming across like that, or you were taking it like that's what I mean by the
It's just
negatively
it,
interpret, or you know
it's just how you take it. It's just how you take. And by the way,
that's based
we
on
all
your
freaking do it,
experiences.
right?
That's what
It's
I'm
a
saying.
lifetime of experiences for Walt McKinley is different than a lifetime of experiences for Stephanie McKinley. Even the
Mhm.
26 years that we spent together, the experiences are different, even the ones we did at the same time. So, okay, look, I know at this point you guys are like, all right, fools, like, give me what the heck am I supposed to do now? I feel you. I know which one or two that I go to right away. I think I know what my spouse does too. How can I change the game with how I speak and communicate with my spouse? And we want to give you just one thing. We did a really hour-long topic before on communication and went more strategic. This is really tactical, and it's the speaker listener technique. Tried and proven. This allows both people to speak without being interrupted, which is really hard in the heat of the battle. You feel like you're battling when you're
Mhm.
arguing, and allows people both to feel seen and heard, And so we're going to give you, you've got like the person speaking gets the floor. The listener, they do certain things. The listener does certain things. And then you both are going to do certain things throughout the dynamic of these conversations. And I promise you, when you first do some of this stuff, you guys, you're going to be like, this is really uncomfortable. It seems super mechanical. There takes so much intention for us to just stop and do it the way that you guys are talking about. It will be a game changer for your relationship. And so you have a choice. Do you let the uncomfortableness of what we're going to talk about make you not do it, and you make the choice to not do it and you continue to struggle in communication? Or do you try something different to maybe get a result that you've never gotten before? Because ultimately that's what all these tactical tips we give is to get you a result maybe you haven't gotten before.
Yeah, I gotta tell you guys. So like we said, this is a thing we're doing in our marriage workshop that we're in. And on this chapter, we talked about communication, and Walt and I had an argument that day that we learned about this. And we have to like read the lesson, and then we're supposed to talk to our spouse about it. And so Walt and I, after reading this one, and we had, like I said, we had an argument earlier today that kind of wasn't resolved, and we went through this, and then we had to sit and talk about it. So, well, it brought up a bunch of stuff. Well, we ended up having a 2-hour, very fruitful conversation
It was a great
because of this.
conversation.
And we practiced this technique, and it works. I got to tell you guys, it works. We actually we really heard each other out. Both of us got to speak. Both of us really listened to each other. We both walked away from that learning something about the other person that we can now use and move forward in a better way.
Yep.
And super useful. You can absolutely implement it. Like he said, it's a little weird at first, a little awkward because you're not used to doing this.
Mm-hmm.
But this is what you should do. This is how to truly communicate in an effective way. Like we were saying, we're always, saying, well, what is communication really? What do you mean by that? This is what we mean.
All right, so let's give them the goods, Steph. Let's get no more anticipation. We're going to give you guys the goods now. So the first thing is, so we're going to break it down. I'm going to talk about for the speaker. What is the speaker supposed to do? So when you start this conversation, both of you guys need to figure out, okay, who's going to go first? Who cares? Both of you will get a chance, right? Instead of the normal arguments where maybe you don't get a chance or your spouse doesn't.
Or you're talking over each other.
Both of you guys are going to get a chance. But you got to only speak for yourself. You can't speak for how you think your spouse feels, how you think your spouse should feel. This is about how you feel, how you think, your perception, and the way that you see the facts in the argument that's laid out in front of you. And it's really important in this that you talk about I.
When you speak only for yourself.
Because when you start to speak for your spouse, you will not find a compromise, and the argument will escalate again. It needs to be about you, how you feel, your perspective, and the facts. And then Steph's going to talk about what the listener is supposed to be doing.
Yeah, and on that, when you're the speaker, try to be concise and stop to let your spouse, that's what we're talking about, like clarify. So after you speak your piece, let your spouse say, this is what I just heard, and paraphrase it to you so that you know they understood what you just said. For the listener, you're listening to understand and not reply.
Damn, that's a hard one. Yeah. Hard for me anyway.
So when you're listening, you have to really be focusing on what they're saying. You're not listening to respond. You're listening to understand what they're saying, like truly listening to hear them out and without being defensive. So you actually really have to just sit there and listen to them without saying anything. You're not allowed to speak while they're speaking.
And don't be giving them mean looks and watch your body language. All that goes into listening with an open heart.
And like we said at the end of the speaker, so when they're done speaking, then you confirm what they said. You say back to them what you heard. And that's how they're going to know you were really listening, because you're going to actually tell them what you feel like they just told you. And this is where you'll find out if those two match up.
Well, and then if you're the speaker in the moment and they don't quite get it, they got A, B, and C, but they missed D, well, give them D. Right? Like, we got to stop being cryptic with each other in conversations and give each other the
I'm
keys.
going to say at the end, when you do paraphrase back to them what you heard, you say, what I hear you saying is. So you're saying, this is what I heard. What I hear you saying is, and you repeat back what you feel like they just told you. So they know you actually heard them. This is important because this is the piece that's missing for most fights.
Yeah.
Most fights, we're both speaking and we're speaking over each other and we're not listening to each other. That's the piece that's usually missing. We're not being an active listener. We're not listening to understand. We're listening to be heard. I mean, we're speaking to be heard because we're trying to get our point across and we're trying to win.
But we're listening to speak.
Yeah. But we're not actually listening and comprehending what they're saying. This is the piece that we really got to
the piece de resistance. So look, and then, okay, so what are both of you guys going to do? First of all, come to the conversation with some damn respect for your spouse. Both. The speaker has the floor. You got to really respect their turn. And by the way, when you paraphrase, you don't say, so what I'm hearing you say is, you think I'm a jerk, but let me tell you how you've been really mean to me lately. And it's not a tit for tat, right? It's respecting your spouse, respecting their emotions, respecting their feelings, even if you don't totally agree. Because in this instance, it doesn't matter who's right. What's right for you is different than what's right for them in these moments when the emotions are high. Respect their turn. When you're paraphrasing back to them, it doesn't mean that their turn's over. Part of the speaker's responsibility is be relatively concise. You can't go for an hour and expect your spouse to stay engaged in the conversation. And then make sure that both people get a real turn where they say what they need to about the conversation that you're having, so everybody leaves the conversation feeling seen and heard, and reach a compromise that works for both people. It might not always be a 50-50 compromise, but a compromise that both people can live with about whatever that issue is, and then take the responsibility onto yourself to actually make the change or the adjustment that your spouse would like to see, and vice versa. Because again, I'm going to keep going back to it over and over and over again. Team marriage. Mm-hmm. That's what wins. For us, it's Team McKinley that wins, not Walt and Steph. Mm-hmm. If one of us wins, one of us loses. And if one of us loses, the marriage loses. I mean, we both
there's
lose.
no individual winner. You only win if you both feel seen and heard and you both come to a compromise and a solution for both of you, not one.
And this will become easier over time, guys. So look, I hope you guys love this episode today. Tell us about it. Let us know what you guys think. As always, just thank you for joining us like you do every single week. We genuinely appreciate each and every one of you guys. And don't forget to join our Facebook group at Legacy Driven Marriages. It keeps growing and growing. It's getting bigger and bigger by the week. And we have people in the arena fighting for their marriage. And the more you're around people like that, the more you're around that constant positivity around marriage, the better your marriage will be. It just, like Steph said, it's the 5 people you hang out with. You can go follow us on Instagram, or we make little videos on TikTok at Legacy Driven Marriages. Damn, we made it about as easy as possible. Or go to our website that we're getting ready to officially launch.
Yes, we're excited about that.
Oh man, a lot of hard work. Like, we're still married after building a website together, y'all. That's pretty good. You want to talk about communicating. And
also the website will be a place that you can come find any of our episodes and watch them or listen to them if you don't already, or if you have trouble finding how to see us. You'll find them on the website, and
you'll get our weekly newsletter that will continue to give you these tips that you can start utilizing right now in your marriage and your relationship. But look, guys, we've had a blast doing this one with you guys today. It's been a lot of fun.
Communicate.
Let's go. So until the next time,
get into the arena of your marriage, keep fighting for your relationship, and keep elevating your generational legacy. And we'll see you guys next Tuesday.
See you next Tuesday.